Very good afternoon to all my dearest student friends. Today, again, we are going to discuss a fresh topic, that is your employment relations in non-union firms. So, whatever discussion we'll make today, after that, one will be able to understand the meaning of non-union organization. In addition to that, also, one will be able to comprehend the reasons for existence of non-union firms. And apart from that, you'll have a better understanding so far as dispute settlement mechanisms in non-union organizations are concerned. And in addition to that, also one will get some insights into workers' involvement mechanisms in non-union context. So basically, one will be able to comprehend the approaches for your employee relations, and that too in non-union firms. So with this backdrop, let me start with your employment relations in non-union firms. Let me give you an introductory lecture with regard to the employment relation in non-union firms. For many decades, what we have seen, the concept, not only the concept, but also the practice normally adopted so far as your employee representations are concerned, it is primarily involved representation through a trade union. Unions, whatever discussion we have made so far, have been viewed always as a kind of, I would say, negotiating agents for collective agreements with employers. Whether you go for negotiating agreement at the unit level, or you go for the negotiating agreement at the industry level, or even you may go for negotiating agreement at the national level. Having said that, if we look at the role of unions has been a result of general understanding that workers have to associate together. Only the purpose is to strengthen their bargaining power, because individually you cannot bargain with the employer. But when you become a member of the trade union, your strength becomes more. Sorry. As a result of which, the strength, sorry, the bargaining power increases with their employers. So unions fulfill their role quite successfully during the decades. If I go back to 1950s, and it continued up to 1980s, they were able to provide substantial gains to workers while going for some kind of bargaining agreements with the employers. The issues are many, issues pertaining to pay, issues pertaining to your working conditions, even if the issues pertaining to your work hours. Such negotiations sometimes also get affected. So it gets affected the gains, the practices of non-union workers too. So, so that is why the industrialization during this phase, whatever we have seen, were marked by several actions. Actions like we have witnessed strikes, actions like we have witnessed lockouts, and therefore the labor policy in India, uh, as in several other countries also, like in USA, there was largely focused on the union management relationship. and workers' participation in management. Uh, so in that case, you'll have to go for collective bargaining. So the focus was on attaining industrial peace by eliminating some kind of unfair labor practices and reducing the instances of strikes and lockout. The organization witnessing more strikes and more lockouts is likely to be affected so far as productivity is concerned. Because as we all know, if the organization does well, people associated with the organization will also be doing well. So with this introduction, and let us now go over to non-union organizations. Non-union firms doesn't mean that union doesn't exist in the establishment. Rather, it refers to an organization where whether management doesn't deal with a trade union that collectively representing the interest of the employees because it doesn't recognize the union for taking some kind of decisions related to your terms and conditions of employment. So it also represents a situation where management consults only a section of workers. And while it doesn't recognize, rather, I would say, another section of workers for the purpose of negotiation, for the purpose of consultations. So your non-unionism occurs in firms because of various reasons. In fact, some of the reasons could be your management, sometimes what we have seen, wants to avoid the trade union influence. Because in every case, there will be some amount of influence will come from the trade union side, and management wants to avoid the trade union, the influence coming from the trade union side. And another reason could be your non-unionism occurred, suppose it occurred by chance and not because your trade unionism caused any kind of problem to the establishment. So the theorist Guest and Hawk, way back in 1994, divided the non-union organizations into several types, and that is uh, either good or bad, uh, underly non-unionism. Because if I look at the good non-unionism, what is that good non-union employer? In fact, they provide an attractive terms and conditions of employment. Everybody is looking for, everybody looks for a better terms and conditions of employment. And the mm, good non-union employer, normally he employs an advanced human resource management practices. For example, you provide greater autonomy. Uh, for example, above average remuneration uh, currently given in the industry, you provide above average remuneration, or you provide developmental opportunities. Similarly, if I look at the bad and ugly non-unionism, it would be appropriate to mention that such firms operate in highly competitive markets, and they are often dependent upon larger enterprises for their work. So, in the bad non-union firms, what is being observed that the management offers poor wages. What is seen that management offers bad working conditions without malintention, while the ugly management always in the process of seeking how to exploit workers. Similarly, another theorist, Falks, way back in 1981, identified certain characteristics of non-union companies as a sense of caring, as a sense of, I would say, climate of trust or high profitability, or as a sense of, it would be appropriate to mention a sense of employment security or promotion from within or influential personnel departments, or you look for some kind of competitive pay and benefits, or you develop some kind of open communication channels. So all these things for better management. So that is the case why we always say that your non-union organizations are also known to be characterized by egalitarianism and equality. Now, let us go over to the reasons for your emergence of non union firms. What could be the reasons? Normally, what we have seen, it is generally considered that the decline in the trade unions is very much attributable to four major factors. What are those four major factors? You start with the structural or the economic changes taking place. Then you go through the political and legal influences that the establishment is going to go through. You go through managerial attitudes and behavior, what is being witnessed in the organizations. And apart from that, also the employee attitudes and behavior has got some kind of bearing on the functioning of the organization. So your non-union firms are very much able to manage employees as well as very well, and as they get some kind of, I would say, opportunity either to deal directly with the employees rather than through unions. So such farms, what we have observed, they experiment with different plans. Uh, the very purpose of improving your employee relations. So if you have lack of unions, that they may also lead to a positive relation between workers and the management rather than viewing them as an opportunity, that means opposition party uh, to you. So many non-union firms are adopting today some kind of innovative ways to improve your employee relations with the particular objective, keeping in view how to improve productivity. So, as you know, students, friends, with the adoption of your new industrial policy in India from 19, if I go back 1991, in fact, which marked the beginning of your economic liberalization. So, country's business environment over a period of time witnessed number of crucial changes, and those changes, like you saw increased competition with multinational firms. You witnessed deregulations. Uh, there has been substantial changes in the technological front. So the monopoly enjoyed by many of the domestic farms declined substantially, and hence their ability to influence customer. So their ability to influence customer, the degree to which they were doing earlier days, has been reduced. So your cost, because we are being the third world developing nation, we are very much conscious about the cost. We are very much conscious about the quality. So your cost effectiveness or the quality that we are all looking for, obviously, the performance standards certainly became important. And all these resulted in your decline of union bargaining power, and your unionization itself. So the practice of contracting, the practice of subcontracting, which was adopted by the private firms, basically had a serious outcome for your unionizations. So the union membership again falling, particularly in case of private sectors. So these trends continued uh, into the 21st century, and without unionization or without, I would say, collective bargaining becoming much less common globally as compared to the period following the first three quarters of the 20th century. And moreover, the nature of the workforce is becoming heterogeneous. So when the nature of workforce is heterogeneous, that means that itself is calling for a change in approaches that are being shaped by relatively homogeneous workers and by unions, concerns for your uniformity, concerns for your consistency that should be in pay, that should be in case of your working conditions. But in some countries, you'll find that the companies have pursued and the union avoidance and union going for some kind of bursting activities. And moreover, the nature of the workforce, when we look at, is becoming heterogeneous. So when the nature of the workforce becoming heterogeneous, this is calling for a change in our approaches that have been shaped by relatively, I would say, homogeneous workers and by union concerning for or looking for uniformity, looking for consistency in pay, looking for uniformity, looking for consistency in case of working condition, everything. So with this discussion, now we go over to the human resource system in non-union firms. Because the human resource systems that we are talking of in many of the organizations is now fulfilling the gap by having uh, high involvement, rather, I would say, with the employees. Though there is still a belief that there is no substitute to unions when it comes to the issue relating to protecting the employee interest, protecting the workers' interests. So the changing shape of organization has changed the form of the employee relation that in the organizations. And if we look at the relationship, it is the relationship between employees and the employer. And the relationship between the employees and employer in 2020 to 23 has gone for a big change. In fact, with the technological interventions in the work, and there has been emergence of your gig economy. So the focus today, when I look at February 2nd, 2023, obviously the focus is on developing the employees, the focus is on retaining talented employees in the organization, in the establishment. So for that, you are heavily dependent upon the various strategies of human resource management. Maybe those strategies have been developed from the time to time with an objective of how best we can enhance the employee satisfactions with a dual, I would say, objective, maybe to improve productivity and to have some kind of positive employee relations. So, in all occasions, the concept of your quality of work life originated way back in 1950s. And during 1980s, when we look at the concept of the quality of work life and the productivity became because of that, we should not um, uh, give anybody um, uh, to allow to say that they are very much responsible for the purpose of maintaining quality of work life, which originated way back in 1950s. Because during 1980s, the concept of the quality of the work life and productivity became popular. So management practices like your quality circles, normally adopted by many companies, and the very purpose is that how to achieve quality in productions and how to go for enhancement of the productivity. So the main focus of the quality of work life has been helpful, no doubt about it, in promoting a number of human resource policies that were aimed at uh, getting substantial productivity increases, as well as cooperation among the workers, between the workers and the management, and that is during the process of technological changes in the farm. So, however, unions, what we have seen in many organizations, were not forthcoming in the supporting these practices because they are also family men. They perceive the program as a threat to their existence if not taken care of at the appropriate time. So human resource management, when we look at, in short, we call it as HRM, has assumed greater importance since 1990s. So you have non-union model, non-union model, that is a non-union model of your industrial relations that emerged in the United States of America, and that in fact enhanced the status of the human resource professionals. So there was an integration, rather, I would say the integration was between which was given uh, on teamwork and autonomy in teams, because no organization is based on the concept of I, the organization is based on the concept of we. So obviously, there was greater emphasis on the teamwork and providing autonomy in teams. So we have changes we have seen in the nature of labor force in many industrialized countries which had taken place. And if we look at the labor class that was better educated uh, and they have a desire for development to happen. So meanwhile, the composition of the workforce, when we look at, they also change significantly with greater participation of the female workforce. So what I mean to say that the increase in the workforce diversity uh, and your greater awareness, developing greater awareness among the workers, maybe the awareness in terms of the demand for the greater autonomy to that particular to the work concerned to the so that in many cases what we have seen that this awareness development among the workers in terms of the demand for greater autonomy to the work schedules and greater autonomy to the job content. Uh, these have led, in fact, to the emergence of collaborative rather than your authoritative management of farms. So the liberated and your educated workers didn't prefer and combined efforts like your collective bargaining to negotiate with the employers so far as employment conditions are concerned. And in this case, the new methods of managing employee relations were gradually developed that would help your non-union firms to have better dealing with the relational issues. So now coming over to the dispute settlement in non-union organization, one has to be very, very clear that the unions have had a significant effect on organizational structure, on organizational practices. How this is that is possible by institutionalizing dispute resolution through a very well defined, well developed process. So, in addition to their important contribution on improving safety, on improving working conditions, on improving the economic gains for the workers, because we have union participation, and you will notice that union participation in collective bargaining, that is an important means for achieving industrial harmony. Similarly, when we look at collective bargaining, that is also viewed as a defining feature for the labor management relationship, so that this will be able to provide for both the parties with an effective, we can say, means for managing workplace conflict. So one has to address those the worker concerns and thereby eliciting the worker voice and inputs, while the grievance process is often as the, you can say, mechanism for advancing workers and union interest is equity, I would say, alongside the employer interest in efficiency. So the grievance procedure, when we are talking of, along with this collective bargaining, don't you feel that they're all unique institutions that tend to strike a trade-off to balance the needs of employer and the needs of the workers? So this balance, if you could make, obviously the balance is achieved by neutralizing the power, the power of your, you can say, unions that constraining management for all practical purposes from taking any kind of unilateral decisions, and that too, which might adversely also affect your workers' interest. So, my dear student friends, the steady decline in your unionizations over the past decade has had serious implications for the way the topic, that is your um, dispute settlement, how it can be made in non-human or non-union organizations. So there is a steady decline. I would like to mention that decline in unionizations over the past decade um, had serious implications for the way we try to get certain things done, or it is resolved in organization. Or sometimes also we have noticed that with the lowering of the union density, that is also another thing that to when you are talking of union density, obviously you have to talk about union density from the organization point of view. So here, what is going to happen that uh, we have many decline in unionisms, but however, this decline doesn't mean that non-human, non-union workers, non-union firms have also proved, because the process, because the steady decline in your unionizations, what we have seen in the past decades, had serious implications. Why the serious implications for the way we normally come across conflicts. So when it is a question of conflicts, now obviously that is not whether we consider that is good or that is bad. So keeping that in view, uh, we always try to see that the decline in unionisms have, however, doesn't mean that the non-union workers, in fact, they have lost their voice, or you can say they don't have means to go for dispute resolutions. So, where the union farms, if we come across, they have involved, I would say, various alternatives to the training traditional institutions so that the money can flow in a circular mode rather than keeping it in two or three hands. And the grievances, because we have got various grievances, because when the decline we saw in unionisms, however, doesn't mean that the non-union workers have lost their voice, or they don't have means to the means to go for any kind of dispute resolutions for non-union workers, because these non-union workers, they are um, uh, very knowledgeable in terms of skill, in terms of knowledge, and the non-union firms have evolved various alternatives to the traditional institutions that function in unionized firms. So various grievance models normally we come across, and dispute resolving methods have also been evolved, because these are all based on your collective participation of employees rather than those taking help of those who are dominated by the workers representatives through union, because strategies we have to heavily depend upon the strategies, and the strategies have been developed by whom? Strategies has been developed by the farms. So if that is the case, and the strategy are developed about their, you can say, the approach, the about the approach that the workers would like to ventilate their voice, and will go for dispute resolutions. So for the time being, if we think that the bilateral negotiation is absent, then in that case, in the absence of the bilateral negotiations, the when it is a question of bilateral, obviously, in the non-union setting, that means, among other things, these decisions are often made with little input, or no, with no input from the workers. So that is why, although workers' perspectives are also taken into consideration, but such decisions are normally taken um, when the situation will demand such decisions taken through managerial authority. And most often, the workers are passive actors in the decision-making process. And since they are central to adoption and they are central to implementation, and these are all things to be taken into consideration for the dispute resolution practice. Such decisions are always, I would say, affected by their presence. So, in the process, what is going to happen, or who is going to get benefited? So, for that purpose, we have to look at the approaches to worker management relations. So at that point of time, first of all, I pick up the word attitudes and approaches of non-union firms will definitely respect to your involvement. And in the process, what is going to happen that when the thrust is on that harvest, we can involve many people at the workplace for the purpose of decision making. So, even though attitude and approaches of non-union firms with respect to involvement, with respect to participation of workers in various decisions, and the methods being adopted for this kind of disputes, and as a result of which management of disputes and um, very very important, and maintaining harmony in relation with the utmost importance of management. So various strategies that we are talking of are adopted by the firms for resolving conflicts, and such strategies may be broadly based on certain approaches, which are to start with avoidance approach. And when we talk about avoidance approach, in this strategy, the firm avoid the use of formal dispute, formal dispute resolution, and participation practices altogether. So, though these various alternative disputes resolution techniques have been evolved, no doubt about it, but not all firms have adopted these methods also. So that is why some prefer to have maybe prefer to have not to formalize things, formalize the dispute resolutions functions. But these firms they normally prefer uh, traditional authoritative approach to solve any kind of managerial problems, workplace conflict, and that is why sometimes also they tend to rely on a top-down approach. So it is a question of approach of conflict, and in that case, what we have observed these days that the conflict which over which we are more concerned about, and these firms they prefer traditional authoritative approaches, and the very purpose is to uh, resolve your workplace conflict and tend to rely more on a top-down approach of a conflict. So similarly, also you can have litigation-centered approach. While reasons for the adoption of this approach, you can uh, take note of that the reasons of adoption of this approach may vary, no doubt about it. But the firms they don't trust, that is also equally not good. Trust the problem benefits of the when you are talking of potential benefit of the your institutionalizing organizational dissolution or the dispute resolutions mechanisms. Similarly, like avoidance approach, you have also defensive approach, and in the defensive approach, uh, what the firm does now, the firm adopts dispute resolution as a means of defending against some kind of external perceived threats, such as the your litigation that you are talking of, your unionization that you are talking of, and you always try to avoid one thing that for the purpose of adoption of formal and worker involvement practices, because under this approach what is going to happen that firms they do recognize the potential and the dispute resolutions practices for all occasion, and to go for the safeguarding the organization from the external pressure being perceived too negatively. And in fact, when we are talking of this negatively affecting maybe the organization's financial or the negatively affecting the organization's managerial or reputational outcomes. So in this case, this approach, when we are talking of approach originates and you can say the belief system of the non-violent and non-union firms can also benefit and you have customized uh, dispute resolution dimensions. So the defensive non-union alternative more it relies on a dispute resolution practices which ensure one aspect that the internal conflict and the uh, disputes which you feel not being exposed and as a result of which the external arts stakeholders you can say and the general public for the purpose of analysis and which may uh, have adverse implications for the farm. That is why the decision to use dispute resolution in this manner will not be appropriate and the manner in which it is deliberated and the strategy adopted and the um, practices you favor. So all these things are, or apart from that, also making it more proactive, but not non they say one thing it is more conceptualized as a narrow dispute resolution approach that doesn't seek to leverage broader benefits and in all these cases when you leverage broader benefits documented subsequently in the union of or maybe non-union settings but this strategy um, therefore um, has certain implications and the employee relation in a farm um, has to be seen and it makes a narrow use of conflict resolution tools and thereby affecting the formal manner, affecting the informal manner by which you find that the workers are in fact the managers they deal with the tension, they deal with the disagreement, they deal with also the dispute arising out of the operation. And the third approach to your work management relation, that is your operational approach. When we look at the operational approach, um, we find that the firms that adopt workers, those workers, they have been involved, the involvement will be there. So firms that adopt the workers' involvement. So after that, you see that harvest the production related input without a corresponding set of dispute resolution practices things being taken into consideration. Similarly, you have, I would say, utilitarian approach here. What is going to happen that the firms can adopt this utilitarian approach as a defensive approach to go for you may say dispute resolution and to go for a production which must be focused to which are mainly focused to a kind of approach to provide workers to go for some kind of participation and to go for some kind of involvement which must be spontaneous. Another approach when we are talking the approach to your worker management relations. One thing we have seen over these years that sorry, firms that leverage your dispute resolution practices in advance, a broad range of your employer-employee relational outcome will come alongside the participation practices. And in fact, that will allow for the expression of both production-centered input as well as your worker-centered input. So you have a strategy, and the strategy is very much designed to provide the organization with a comprehensive systematic approach. And when we are talking of comprehensive systematic approach, that is for the purpose of managing conflict. And the strategy is based on keeping in view the dispute resolution as a means to strengthen relational capabilities, to strengthen managerial capabilities, and the process. Uh, it provides broad organizational outcomes, it provides broad worker outcomes. While a defensive strategy focuses on the narrow organizational features of dispute resolution, but I would say an expansive strategy is very much based on a wider range of dispute resolution functions. So, what I mean to say that where firms they seek to leverage alternative disputes resolution technique, uh, they try to solve for a better, rather, it would be appropriate to mention that they try to solve for a broader employment relation approach, and that is based on organizational culture, which is very much focused on your collaboration, which is very much focused on your partnership, which is very much focused on your problem solving. So the manner in which the farms, the unions, or even your non-unions, they deal with the conflict that is reflective of the uh, overarching employer-employee relation. Because we have got processes like your collective bargaining, processes like your workers' involvement in management, process like your grievance process, where you notice one thing that the union has active involvement. Uh, they have the purpose to advance specific organizational needs, to advance specific workers' needs, because you have non-union aspect, that means non-union firms have developed their own mechanisms for responding to any kind of work-related conflicts, any kind of work-related disputes in the absence of collective bargaining, uh, and in the absence of your negotiated grievance procedures. Because these mechanisms may be adopted forms of your traditional methods, and in the process, furthermore, since different farms would attend different, I would say, uh, levels of significance, keeping in view the conflict resolution, I would say there would be some kind of variation one will look for in alternative strategies that will be guiding their decisions, no doubt about it. And that is why also different organizations today, different uh, they have different policies regarding adoption of conflict resolution alternatives. And apart from that, also they are motivating their motivations. What is going to happen is that their motivations, they are determining their own adoption decisions. They also which they also vary. So now we'll go over to the alternative dispute resolution strategies, because we have got various dispute resolution methods, no doubt about it. They have been evolved um, ever since there is a growing proportion of farms. They have all started turning to non-union farms, and in fact started adopting the internal alternative to unionized or tripartite means of resolving conflict. So you always try to take the help of the third party for necessary interventions. So in this case, it is important that what matters is the underlying motivations during which can be the driving force for the purpose of use of specific practices. So to start with, you have right-based options, and in the right-based options, what we have noticed, one has to be judicious, and these are all connected with your rights of employees, and what is the mandatory employment attributions, what is the mandatory employment arbitrations, because when we are talking of mandatory arbitration, that is again a clause in a contract that requires the parties to resolve their disputes through a process of arbitrations. So there has been, over a period of time, what we have noticed, that there has been a rapid growth in adoption of mandatory employment arbitration by the firms. There has been rapid use of machine mandatory employment arbitration by the firms. So this approach may be considered to be falling when we talk about your defensive approach, because mandatory arbitration agreements, you have a cap. You would like to cap the worker's ability to take employment related claims, maybe in the court, instead of a kind of offer binding, a kind of offer with private kind of offer, your right based process. So mandatory arbitration can be positive, can be negative for a particular firms. And so for that also one has to go for a pre-review methods and all that. The second is your interest-based options, because in case of interest-based options, they are all used by certain non-union firms to address your external threats. That is why, for example, the firms may use mediation to avoid unionizations. And as this technique is commonly used in the unionized grievance process, so obviously your dispute resolution practices, they are all commonly used in the unionized grievance process, because dispute resolution practices and your according to this approach, we have tools that organization use to further certain interests and deliver on specific strategies. And apart from that, also when we look at the tools that organization use to further certain interests and deliver on some specific strategies, it is also used as a means of supporting firms' employees relation approach. So at that point of time today also we are taking the help of mediation. Mediation is a technique which is designed for the purpose that to explore disputes parties underlying the needs and the concern. So there will be some kind of third party involvement for the purpose. So, in all these cases, the firms are also likely to leverage your mediations for the purpose of pain, going beyond the efficiency and union avoidance. Now, coming to the types of non-union strategies, either you have participation or avoidance, or you have production or production center participation. So if you look at the participation avoidance, obviously firm may decide not to have any kind of formal mechanism for workers' involvement. There should not be any kind of formal mechanism for workers' participations, or it is a question of grievance management. So this limits the exchange between management and the workers, and such organizations to make an attempt to pay any process which are aimed at providing some kind of voice to workers. So these firms that do not formalize the work participation, even your involvement mechanisms, do not believe in providing workers any kind of formal, you can say, platforms. And those formal platforms are approved by the management to provide any sort of input, or they may share thoughts and the plans. And finally, one will be able to participate in the decision making, one able to participate in raising the workplace related issues or issue or grievances. So these strategic choice may be the outcome of different reasons, and the reasons being may include perceived your financial cost involved in satisfying worker needs and concerns. The reasons could be the apprehension, and when I say apprehension of undermining the management authority, and that too, this is due to the participation of the workers in operations, uh, decision making. So either it will be production centered participation or it is the workers' participation. If we look at the workers' participation, obviously the participation and the involvement to enhance and improve your production processes as well as the workers' interest. And worker-centered approach works very well when the farms, what they do, they adopt some kind of mechanism which will better facilitate to have some kind of meaningful interactions between the workers and the management in relation to several issues that do not just pertain to production or productivity, but the worker involvement. And when I say worker involvement, obviously they look for worker involvement in the broader aspect in this approach, which is compared with production-centered participation practices. So such practices, when we make a discussion, include one thing that include your self-managed teams, your consultative teams, your joint decision-making practices. Among all, I would others, nonetheless, the non-union firms that adopt this strategy are equally concerned with leveraging the strategy for the purpose of enhancing production, for the purpose of enhancing productivity. So now let us go over to the factors affecting the employee relation in non-union firms, where the employee relation strategies are adopted by the firm. They are all dependent upon a number of factors, and that is why, and those factors they dominate the firm's strategic combination of the workers' participation in management. So that is why the factors could be the external pressures that may come from, or it is from internal organizational dynamics that one will notice, or there will be employment relation model, or there should be workforce characteristics. So when we are talking of all these things, one will be able to know the aspect of the employment relation in non-union firms. So unions have been believed all these days as a negotiating agent for the purpose of collecting collective agreements, for the purpose of collective agreement that do with the employers. So in this case, when we look at the firms may adopt one of the three workers' participation strategies: avoiding participation, or your production-centered participation, or worker-centered participation. And we have four dominant factors that drive firm strategy for the purpose to manage overarching employee relations, and apart from that also the external pressure which will be coming, that is to be the firm has to withstand, or the internal organizational dynamics and the employment relation models and the workforce strategy need to be studied more. So, with this, we come to an end of today's discussion. That is your employment relation in non-union firms. I sincerely hope that my dearest student friends, they have properly understood the subject matter, and now they will be able to have better understanding of the meaning of non-union organization. They can better comprehend the reasons for existence of non-union firms. They'll have a better understanding regarding the dispute settlement mechanisms that do in non-union organizations, and they'll have better insights into the workers' involvement mechanisms in non-union context. And apart from that, on the whole, they'll be in a better position to comprehend the approaches for your employee relations in non-union firms. So with this, we come to an end of today's discussion. Thank you very much. Have a nice time.